Good morning, students. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more about the syllogism. And it's a strange kind of formula that you've probably never seen before. And it might even be a little intimidating. I'm not sure what you see in your head when you see these figures, MP on the top line, SM, and then SP. It might not mean anything to you right away because it's just a formula. It doesn't mean anything. But remember, that formula is something that Aristotle, he's a genius, found embedded in people's thinking. He saw that structure in his head. He saw your thinking has a certain structure. So going back to my son from the last lecture, when my son was watching The Lion King, he was watching the time when Mufasa died by the wildebeest. You all know your Lion King. And when Mufasa died, my son looked over at me on the couch and said, "Are you going to die?" And, and I suddenly realized that my son had been alive. He was only 5, but he had been alive long enough to be able to say certain things die. In other words, his major premise, the top part of his syllogism, MP, and I'll explain the M and the P and the S. I'll give you a little bit more of an explanation. But his general premise, the starting point was all things die, that all living things die. My dad is a living thing. And so he said, "Dad, are you going to die?" But you could see that he went from a general premise to a particular application, me, his dad, and then he came to a conclusion about me, his dad, me, and the fact that I'm mortal. So Aristotle must have, you know, as a philosopher, he must have listened to people argument, and he started to see that when people came to a conclusion, you could put that conclusion into a formula, and that's what the syllogism is. So the syllogism is nothing but the actual thinking that we already do naturally, normally, like my kid at 5 years old. And it's the formula of that thinking. I think that's important to kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about the syllogism. So I'll explain the terms and everything uh, later. So let me give you another example in the booklet that also talks about how this formula is already embedded in your mind. Even if you've never taken a philosophy class, logic class, it's already a formula that you have embedded in your mind. For instance, I'll do this little practice thing in my face-to-face classes where if there's somebody in the very front of the class, usually it's a woman, because you guys are able to emote more. Your emotions are a little bit more visible. That's a generalization. Okay, so I'll pick a female sitting in front of my class, and I'll go, "Hey, what's your name?" And she'll say, Jennifer. And I'll go, "Hey, nice to meet you." Usually on the first or second day of class, I'll go, "Nice to meet you, Jennifer." I'll stick my hand out there. "I'm Professor Orozco. I'm HIV positive, and I have an open cut on my hand." And I'll extend my hand. Usually I'll put like a red mark right here as if, my hand was bleeding. And it's really funny because the female, even though she knows it's kind of a play acting thing, she'll often go, you can see in her face that she's going, "Oh my God, I'm just shaking the hand of somebody who's got HIV." And just that little reaction of her brain will show you that she did in 1 nanosecond a syllogism. And think about what she just did. If she had this reaction of something like that, there's already a syllogism that she did in her head. And if you think about it, watch the structure. This is in chapter 3, you'll see it. All people who are HIV positive with open cuts are contagious. That's the major premise. The minor premise, Mr. Orozco is HIV positive with an open cut. That's the minor premise. Conclusion, Mr. Orozco is contagious. Now you might think, she didn't think that. Absolutely she thought that. Because if she had any kind of reaction in her face like, that's exactly what she was thinking. You're contagious. So think about, once again, all people with HIV positive who have open cuts are contagious. Mr. Orozco is HIV positive who has an open cut. Mr. Orozco is contagious. she absolutely had that syllogism in her brain. She didn't have to take a philosophy class to have that in her brain. Her brain does that naturally, and we do that naturally all the time. Aristotle was a genius in just being able to spot that our thinking could be put into a formula. And we do all kinds of syllogisms in our head all the time. I'll give you some really kind of like stereotypical syllogisms. They're not very good, but they'll just show you the basic structure of our head. That our mind can produce syllogism very easily. So if I say, all whales are mammals, Shamu is a whale, what would you end up saying? Shamu is a mammal, right? If all whales are mammals and Shamu is a whale, then Shamu is a mammal. Okay, if you didn't like that one too much, but watch how you probably can come up with the answer to this, even though you've never really taken a logic class before. So if I say, all reptiles are cold-blooded, that's the major premise, all reptiles are cold-blooded, my iguana is a reptile, therefore, if you guys are coming up with this, you would say, my iguana is cold-blooded. Do you notice how your brain is just kind of led to that conclusion? If you have this general conclusion and then you make this application in the particular case to the iguana, then you'll know that the iguana is also cold-blooded. Can you see how your brain kind of does that without even a logic class? You just do that naturally. That's what Aristotle figured out in the syllogism. So next I'm going to start talking to you a little bit about the parts of the syllogism, because you'll notice that there's letters that are in the syllogism, right? There's M, P, and S. So the top line of the syllogism, MP, that MP is the major premise. Now the M and the P, check this out, the M and the P doesn't mean major premise. The top line of the syllogism is called the major premise. The M is actually referring to something called the middle term. The M is the middle term. The P is the predicate. Okay. On the second line, you have SM. So what does that mean? That's the subject is also part of the middle term. Okay, SM, and then the conclusion would be, therefore, S is P. So those are the three lines of a syllogism. A syllogism has three lines. The major premise, which is MP. Okay, please keep in mind that MP there is just kind of coincidental. It doesn't mean major premise. It's the top line is always called the major premise. But that MP is made up of the middle term. The M is the middle term. P is the predicate. P is the predicate. The second line is the subject. The subject of whatever you're talking about is related. Should go this way. I'm sorry, the camera's all reversed, and it's kind of weird to do it this way. So the subject is also part of the middle term, and then the subject is also related to the predicate. So those are the three elements or the three parts of the syllogism: the major premise, the minor premise, and of course the conclusion. I'll talk to you a little bit more about what the M means, and the S and the P. Okay, so let's talk about the M. What the heck is that? The M. Well, the middle term expresses kind of like the relationship between the two other terms, which are the S and the P. And so right now I hear myself talking to you, and I'm right. I'm Charlie Brown's, the professor in Charlie Brown's, those old Peanuts things. We're doing woo, woo, woo. I know how I sound because I'm just a voice talking to you. So let me try to keep it more human here. So the middle term, the best way to do it is just kind of like to express it as something. It's in the booklet, and then just to give you a basic idea. So if I know that all Spaniards, all people from Spain are European, right? Because Spain, that little peninsula, is part of Europe. So all Spaniards are European. All Spaniards are European. And if Pedro is a Spaniard, what would I also know about Pedro? Pedro would also be a European. So you can see that the middle term there, which is Spaniards, is kind of in a middle position, linking Pedro with the continent of Europe. In other words, Spain is kind of like in a middle position. Here I am in the middle, and it's linking these other two elements of European with the particular person, Pedro. Okay, so that's what the middle term is supposed to do. It's supposed to link the other two terms, and that's designated in a syllogism by the letter M. The M is the linking term between the S and the P. The S just means the subject of the conclusion. So think about my son when he said, "Dad, are you going to die?" Dad, meaning me, I'm the subject of the conclusion. The syllogism was kind of starting with all people and then focused in on the subject, the particular thing, Orozco. Okay, it's the same thing with Shamu. All whales are mammals. Shamu is a whale. Shamu is a mammal. It focused in on the subject of Shamu. It started general and then went specific. It did the same thing with iguana. It focused in on the subject. The subject is the particular thing that we're talking about. After we start kind of general, it focuses in on the particular thing. And so the S is the particular thing. It's called the subject. The predicate is just whatever the quality of that subject is. In my particular case, the subject, Orozco, was going to die. In the subject of Shamu, Shamu was a mammal. In the reptile, the subject iguana, was that it was cold-blooded. So it was focusing in on a subject, and that subject had a particular characteristic or a predicate. That's what the P is. The predicate is the characteristic of the subject. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit wordy here. You're going to need to read chapter 3 and kind of hear this lecture in conjunction with the writing, because the writing is going to be a supplement to this. There's also a PowerPoint that is going to be available in this module, so knock yourself out, with all this stuff. Okay, so then the next thing that you'll see in chapter 2 is chapter 3 is the verb copula. Well, if you notice, when you start on the major premise, MP, you'll notice that there's a little hyphen, MP. Well, that hyphen is referring to the verb copula. Okay, this stuff comes from Greek and from Latin sources, and so copula means the coupling element, the link between the M and the P, or the link between the two terms. So just usually the verb copula is indicated by is, all or are, or is not or are not. So let me kind of break that down to you. So if I say all mammals are warm-blooded, can you hear what the verb copula is between those two things, mammal and warm-blooded? All mammals are warm-blooded. What's the link between mammals and warm-blooded? Are. So that's the verb. It's a verb. It means this is the link between those two things. And I can use the word is. You can say the car is gray. Can you hear that the verb copula between car and gray is? Or I can say the car is not fast, or the car is broken down, or the car is not ready at the dealer. Can you hear that the linking verb there, the copula, is either is or is not? If it's singular, like a car is, or the car is not. That's singular, is or is not. Or it can be plural. The students are sleepy. The students are enthusiastic. The students are not loving logic. So what's the link between those two things, students and logic? Are or are not. That is what is referred to as the verb copula, that little hyphen that you see in between these two letters. That's all it means. It's the little linking thing between the other two terms. Okay, so you're going to notice also that in chapter 3 I talk about the figures of the syllogism. And I'm going to get a little theoretical here, but I'm going to try to keep it simple. It's a summer class. Well, I might even be using this same lecture in the fall, so anyway. But I'm going to try to keep it simple. I use figure 1 the most. I'll also use some figure 3 because that refers to induction. But figure 1 is the most typical expression of a syllogism. It's the one we do the most in our brain. It's what my son did, for instance. He started out general, and then he went specific. I gave you the one about Shamu and about the iguana. It always starts out kind of general and goes specific. So you'll see the MP, NP, SM, SP. Can you see that it's actually this way, the middle term kind of like links, actually it's all messed up. So don't look at my hand gestures at all because the camera is reversing. So you can see that the middle term is kind of like at a sideways pattern, and that is figure 1. I'll project it up on the, with an annotation. You can see it a little bit better. So the middle term is kind of like in a slant position. That's figure 1. There's also a figure 2, which we won't use very much. It's not as, our brain, let's put it this way. Think about the figures as a different way to come to a conclusion, in the same way that when you're in a Word program or in Keynotes or Notes, if you have a Mac program or if you any other kind of Word program, you'll notice that there's several different ways to edit, to cut and to paste. Like if you're on a Macintosh, you can use Control V, Control A, Control V, and stuff like that to kind of like do to edit, to insert your cursor to edit some text, and we get pretty good. But could I do it also another way? Can I also go to File, Edit, Cut, Paste? I can do it several different ways. They all work. So think of the figures of the syllogism as different ways to come to a conclusion, in the same way that you can use different methods to edit your Word document. I think that's the clearest way to talk about it. But what if you get really good, let's say at figure 1, if you get to Control Alt, Control C, Control V, if you know how to do that quickly on your keyboard, you're all good. You know how to edit your document. So you can learn a couple of different ways to do it. But if you learn how to do it one good way, would that be good enough? Yeah. Okay, so in this particular class, we'll be focusing in mostly on figure 1 and on figure 3. I'll put figure 3 up so that you can see it. I'll put all the figures up, but just notice that I'll mostly be working in figure 1, figure 3, with some figure 2, but it only comes in a particular way, and I'll refer to that when I get into the rules of the syllogism. Okay, so now, so that was the figures of the syllogism. This might not be really clear to you. Look in the booklet, chapter 3, and look at my written comments on the figures, and hopefully it'll get a little bit more clear to you. So now I'm going to talk about the moods of the syllogism. You'll see that in chapter 3, the moods of the syllogism. Well, that's kind of weird. The mood? What do you mean by the mood of the syllogism? Well, please keep in mind that each line of the syllogism, the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion, can be expressed in a mood, meaning I could be talking about a singular thing, or I could be talking about a plural thing. So listen to this, or a plural thing meaning universal. So listen for a second. Let's say I'm talking about a major premise. If I said all students are broke, meaning broke, you have no money, am I talking about a singular student, or am I talking about all students? Listen again. All students are broke, especially with this pandemic, right? If you got money, you're balling, you're doing good. So if I said all students are broke, am I talking about a singular person, or am I talking about all? I'm talking about all, right? So that kind of a statement, whether it's in the major premise or in the minor premise or in the conclusion, if you're talking about a whole group of something, an entire group of something, that's called a mood, universal affirmative. Don't be tripping in terms of, well, why call it A? Is it because you start with all? No, it doesn't have, I could have said mood 1 or red mood. The ancient Greek and the Latin scholars who figured out all this stuff, going back centuries, they just used I think, or actually when it came into the English speaking world, they just decided, let's call the first mood A, because we all know the alphabet. And they decided, let's use the vowels, A, E, I, and O. So the first mood of a syllogism, whether we're talking about the major premise, the minor premise, or the conclusion, if you're talking about an entire group of individuals or things, I could be talking about butterflies. I don't have to be talking about people. I could be talking about all computers, all cars, all viruses, all presidents, all black victims of crime. I could be talking about anything. If I'm talking about all of them, um, all S is P, S meaning the subject. All of this subject has this characteristic, and I'm talking about all of them. That is called a universal affirmative mood. If I said all cell phones today are smartphones, is that a particular thing? Am I only referring to one cell phone, or am I talking about all of them? All of them. So that means all cell phones are smartphones. I'm sure there's plenty of throwaway burner phones too, but okay. But I'm talking about all. Maybe not a good example, but you know what I mean. If I'm including an entire group of something, that means all. So that's called an A mood. That's called universal affirmative. I can start a universal affirmative mood by saying all S is P, every S is P, or if I just drop everything in front and just say S is P, because you would know that that entire group of subject is predicate. So if I said horses are beautiful, what's the implication there? Well, it's universal because you're talking about horses. You're not leaving any out. So the implication there is horses are beautiful. You're not leaving any horses out. So that's a universal affirmative mood. Now, what does it mean affirmative? It just means that the subject, you're just saying, goes into this predicate. All of this subject here, this subject, goes into this predicate. All horses, God, it's so weird, this camera reverses me, are beautiful. Okay, so you're talking about now what does it mean affirmative? You're just saying they're linked together. Let's go down to the next mood so you can see what the opposite of that like. So the E mood is called universal negative, and here you'll get a little bit more of it, what it means when I say affirmative, because you'll see the opposite of it. So an E mood is when you say no S is P. No, and when I'm saying S, I'm saying no subject, no thing, no subject is P. So if I said no presidents or no United States presidents are honest. Did you notice that now I'm also using, it's called universal because I'm still talking about the entire group of United States presidents. But in this particular case, I'm saying they do not have this predicate, meaning honesty. So if you think about it, all of the S is being negated, denied from the predicate, of being honesty. So in the A mood, all of the subject has the predicate. All of the subject has the predicate. In an E mood, none of the subject, as an entire group of things, an entire group, because it's still universal of that subject, none of that entire group of that subject belongs to that predicate group, meaning honesty. No president belongs in the honesty group. I can say that no S is P, or I can say all S is not P, which is basically the same thing. I can say no S is P. You're still negating those two things. Or I could say all of S is not P. So I hope you can see that. So that's the way that we can talk about E mood. An I mood, what's that one? An I mood, now why I? Just the vowels, A, E, I, and then we're going to go into O. So the third mood, we could have called it purple mood, yellow mood, and blue mood. Okay, so don't trip too much on that. So an I mood is just particular, a particular affirmative statement. What do you mean by particular? So instead of talking about universal, a universal group, all presidents or all students, you're talking about one person or one thing. This horse is beautiful, or this logic class is fascinating. Or you could say this basketball player is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. So you're talking about one in it, like LeBron is the greatest of all time, or Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time, or Lionel Messi is the greatest of all time. Whatever you're saying, but you're talking about one person. That's an I mood. One particular thing is called an I mood. Or it could be like even some little smaller group, but it's not the whole group. You could say Lionel Messi is the greatest of all time, or you could say Lionel Messi and Ronaldinho and I don't know who else want to throw in there. Cristiano Ronaldo are the greatest of all time. Well, you mentioned three, but you notice it's still a smaller group. It's particular. It's either an individual or a small subset of all soccer players. So do you understand what I mean by an I mood? It's particular. It's a smaller group, either an individual or a small little subset. So I don't know if I have any particular things here. I don't have any books or something on my desk right now, but if I'm just saying some of my books are interesting, I'm not talking about all of my books. They're there. See, this is a weird thing. It's in reverse. My books back there. Some of the books on my little book nightstand are interesting. Some. If I said all of my books are interesting, that's universal. All of that, the 6 or 7 books that you see back there are universal. If I said all of them are interesting, but if I said some of my books are interesting, that's an I mood. And then the O mood, some S. So, but let me finish by saying the I mood is designated by some S is P. Some S, some subject is P. And in the O mood, which is the fourth of the moods, I would say some S is not P, if that makes sense to you. So some S is not P. So some students are not sleepy. Some students are not bored. Some students are not broke. Some students are not, I don't know, down with this material. Whatever you want to put in there. But it's some, it's also particular, but now it's particular but not having that characteristic. Some students are interested. That's an I mood. Particular affirmative. And then some students are not interested. So they're not interested. So now the sum of the group is being negated from the being interested group. I hope that didn't go over your head. I think at this point I'm going to put an end to this video because probably a third video would be good to go into the one last element of chapter 3, which would be the rules of the syllogism, which would be about another 20 minutes or so. You don't want an hour video on this, so let me stop while I'm ahead and y'all are still interested. Bye.